What's up everyone, Zack Dettmore here and welcome to another episode of Let's Renovate a Bathroom. Last time we focused on getting this tile installed and that means we're moving on to trim carpentry, my favorite part of the job. So today I'm going to go over the essential elements of installing door casing, installing window casing, and installing a complicated threshold or saddle that connects the hallway floor to the bathroom floor. This can not always be easy, so we're going to go ahead and make that out of wood, which is a skill that you can probably apply directly to your project. Then we're going to go through some of the fundamentals of caulking, filling, prepping, and painting that trim so you know how to do that. I'm excited to get going. Let's do it.
Let's renovate a bathroom. A build original series brought to you by Schluter Systems.
Hey everyone, Zack Dettmore here. In this wonderful bathroom remodel, a little over a decade ago, I switched over to using an all-in-one system for a couple reasons. One, because they offer a warranty with all-in-one systems like the Schluter products, but also because one person, either the tile installer or my crew, is taking full ownership of that shower system and making sure it gets installed correctly. The great thing about Schluter is they have a ton of information online or in person to train installers on how to install these things properly. They've been in the business for about 50 years coming up with solutions for tile installers, such as their metal edge, which they're known for, but also the uncoupling membrane that we use on the floor and the heat cable that we use. But really what I think is a huge win for us as contractors is the all-in-one shower system, because that's the #1 issue I've seen for ripping out a perfectly good bathroom is because the shower pan is leaking. So by using the drain and using the wall board, we're able to sort of tie everything together. It's one monolithic piece. It's very easy to install and it's easy to water test, so the inspectors like it as well. Finally, the other thing I wanted to touch on is the quantity of drains and drain locations. If you're doing a remodel like we are and you have to work around the existing situation, Schluter offers a ton of different drain sizes and offsets, so it's really easy to make sure you get everything lined up exactly and it looks like an intentional design. So that's sort of why I've stuck with these products, and it's definitely limited my liability. Check out their products and go online to see their educational videos. All right, so the next thing we want to work on is measuring up for window casing. There's a couple things you'll notice here. We have this old stop molding that basically we're going to want to peel this away because we're going to replace this, get rid of these brackets for the old window treatments and pull any nails that are out. And then we're just going to clean up. Now you could just sand down the face of this or you could just scrape it if you don't have a sander. But just follow me through those steps so we have a nice clean opening, so then we can take our measurements from that. First thing you want to do is put something in the tub to protect it and work very slowly and safely. Now we'll pull out any nails. Make sure you grab them as you work. You don't want to leave them on the floor or in the tub. So now that we got the nails out, I'm going to take this sander and I'm just going to sand the face of this to remove anything that could be in my way. Look how nicely that window operates with nothing on it. Perfectly balanced. There's weights in the pockets here. So this is the original window to the house. So basically the weights correspond to the weight of this sash, and that allows it to just be perfectly in balance. They're called weight and chain windows for that reason. You see the chain here and the weight is in the weight pocket. Pretty cool design. Still works to this day. So the first thing we want to do when it comes to measuring this window is take some measurements, and you'd be surprised how few you really need to take. So the first thing we're going to do is start with the opening of this window. So we're going to go to the bottom and measure the full opening, which comes out to 30 1/8 light. So we're just going to draw our opening on here. 30 1/8 light. Light just means slightly less if you don't feel like measuring to the 32nd, right? Now we're going to go get our vertical. And our vertical, actually, this is the profile of our stool. A lot of people think of a window sill as being this piece, but the sill is actually the exterior part. The interior part we call a stool. So that's going to kind of mount right like this here. And then I'll come in, take a measurement up. That's 40 15/16. And then I'll do the other side. 40 7/8. 40 7. So we'll do 40 7/8 for each jamb extension. It's important to remember that even if your window is not perfectly square, you do want to try and make your casing perfectly square within reason, because it'll be easier for you to assemble it. So now that we know our jamb extension height, we know our apron height, we're actually able to sort of extrapolate out with our casing, and that'll make more sense in the shop. But what we need to know is our jamb extension depth. And we call it jamb extension because basically this is our jamb, but we've added tile here. So now the tile projects out past. So we need to add a piece of wood on top that brings us out or extends us far enough for the casing to be on top of the tile. So an easy way to do that is take something flat. In this case, I'm using a combination square, and I'm going to measure from the plane of the wall inward, and that gives us just under 1/4 inch there, just under 1/4 inch there, and then up here it's actually flush. So for the sake of making this easy, we're going to go ahead and make everything, our jamb extensions, 1/4 inch. 1/4 inch by 3/4 inch. Right? So if we're going to make a cut list for this, we know that these jamb extension legs are going to be 40 7/8. So we have 2 jamb extensions that are 40 7/8 by 1/4 by 3/4. Now it's time for us to do the head piece. Now, if we cut it exactly to 30 1/8, which is this dimension, we would be a little bit short because we actually want it to go a little bit past. We're not mitering these, we're just going to stack these. So in this case, we're going to hold it 3/4 inch past on each side, which gives us 31, and let's call it 31 3/4 by 1/4 by 3/4. So now that has brought us out. Now we have our window stool, which acts as a jamb extension on the bottom, and that is going to be 30 1/8 plus our reveal, which is the distance between the inside of the jamb extension and where the casing starts, and then the thickness of the casing. So our casing is going to be 4.5 inches. Our reveal, to make it easy in this case, will be 1/4 inch. So we're going to have 4.5 plus 1/4 plus this space plus 1/4 plus 4.5. So if you're not too comfortable with this math, we can just lay it out in the way it'll actually happen. And then we're going to have a little bit of an extension of this sill sitting beyond. So basically, if you could imagine, this is our casing. It ends here. We want a little bit of extension beyond that for our window stool, if that makes sense. So how we're going to accomplish that is we're going to put the stool where we want it, and then we're going to measure straight forward to come up with our overhang. So we're measuring 2 inches, but we know we have 1 inch of casing and jamb extension, which means we're projecting 1 inch. So basically, our stool needs to get cut 1 inch plus 4 1/2 is our casing, plus 1/4 plus 30 1/8, which is our point-to-point distance inside the window. And then we're just going to do everything in reverse. 1/4 for the reveal, 4 1/2 plus 1 inch. And all of this will give us our total stool length. I'm not going to do that in my head because I don't want to get it wrong, but it's going to be 1 plus 4.5 plus 0.25 times 2 plus 30, 36 1/8. So our stool is 36 1/8. So now that I've got measurements from here to here and from here to here, I'm basically able to extrapolate all the measurements I need. So we know our stool, our jamb extension. Once we build that in the shop, we can get the measurements for our casing, our head, and our cornice, and our apron. Now it's time to measure the casing for this door. First thing we want to do is get our internal measurements, then we can add on the reveal for our jamb extension, then we'll add on another reveal for our casing. Let's take those measurements right now. So we're going to measure from the floor to the underside of the casing, which is 76 3/4. We're going to add 3/16 of an inch to that dimension for our reveal, which gives us 76 15/16. On this side, we'll do the same thing, and that gives us 76 13/16. 76 13/16, 76 15/16. Now at our head, we know that can overhang a little bit, so we'll take the total jamb width, 29 1/2, 29 1/2, and then we want our point-to-point interior dimension. So we're going to measure that, and that comes out to 28. So we're going to write on the inside here, 28. And that will allow us to get the dimensions we need. The only other dimension we need for this door is going to be the jamb extension and how far it sticks out. Just like we did over there, we're going to plane out, take a measure back. That's 5/16. Over here, 5/16. Down here, 5/16. So our jamb extension the whole way around is going to be 5/16 by 3/4. All right, the next thing we want to do is cut a transition because we have a big step up into this bathroom. This could be made with marble or stone or tile, but because wood is the easiest thing to work with, I'm going to suggest you make it with wood for a DIY approach. It allows you to make more fine tunes. You can sand it versus if it's stone, you might need more specialized tools. So for today, we're going to show it being done with wood. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find a point on this side. I'm going to make this level, and I'm going to measure down. And it looks like the total difference in height is 1 9/16. On this side, the difference is 1 1/2. So to be honest, 1 1/2, 1 9/16 are close enough to each other that I think I'm going to actually just go ahead and make this thing symmetrical on both sides. So it won't be a tapered cut, it'll just be one piece. So we know we have the tile here and the 1 1/2 inch drop, and we have the floor below. So we're going to have to make a step there, and then we just need the width. The width for this door opening is 28 inches. We want this to be roughly, could be as much as 5 1/2 inches total. And then, because the tile, I want a little bit of meat sitting on the tile. I don't want it to end there. We're going to extend the saddle in a little bit and put 2 horns on it. So I'm going to have the horns of the saddle extend 1/4 inch beyond. So just so I know that for the shop. Horn is going to be 1/4 of an inch. All right, so that's all the dimensions we need to make this. Let's go to the shop. All right, so the first thing we need to do now that we're in the shop is cut our jamb extensions. That's the piece of wood between the casing and the jamb of the window and the door. So we need a piece that's roughly 77 inches, a piece at 77 inches. We need a piece at 40, 40, 29, and 30. What was it? It was 31 3/4. So we're going to rip all those on the table saw. For the windows, they're all 1/4 of an inch. For the doors, they're all 5/16. So we'll start with the doors, and then we'll rip them for the door. So this piece of wood we're using is 80 inches, so it'll get us 1 rip, 2 rips, 3 rips, and then for the window we'll do 1, 2, and then we can get the residual piece for the head out of the top of that. So I'm here at the table saw. This saw is basically meant for ripping, which is cutting the long length of a board. I've set my blade 1/4 of an inch away from the fence. So we're going to make 3 rips through this material. We're going to take it nice and slow. We're going to use push sticks to guide it. So I'm keeping my fingers away. And that's all you need to know. Typically I'd have a blade guard for dust control and safety. I've removed that so you can see what's happening with the cut. So now that we've cut the 2 at 1/4 of an inch, now we're going to cut 3 at 5/16. So I'm going to nudge the fence over 1/16 of an inch. Now we're going to go ahead and make these 3 cuts. So now we have our 3 pieces at 5/16 for the door jamb. We can cut these pieces down to size to be installed at the job site over at the miter saw. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to cut these down to length at the miter saw. Now I have this built into my shop, but the concept is the same if you have a job site saw. Really, the accuracy with trim work and getting your saw dialed in is very important, but the concept is very much the same. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring these pieces in. We're going to cut a square edge on it. We're not going to leave the factory edge, because if you want crisp carpentry, you don't want to be working with a poor starting point. So we're going to cut these down, and then we're going to measure off the fresh cut to our points that we laid out back at the job site. So you can just sort of follow me through this. So this is our door leg, which is 76 13/16. Make a little mark exactly where it is, and then I'm going to leave the line on. You can see that little line that was left on the edge. That is where I wanted to cut it. Now we'll go ahead and cut door jamb extension right. .76 15/16 this time. Finally, we have our head for the door. We know that the door width is 28, but we actually want to cut it to 29.5. We know this isn't a really important measurement because there's a little bit of overhang there, but we'll still cut it accurately. And then we'll write door, head, jamb, extension. Now we're going to come in and we're going to cut our window jamb extensions. So we've got 40 7/8 on one side. Now our top is going to be 31 3/4. And we got one more. I'm going to use the one I've already cut, place it on top because I do want these to be very consistent. And then I can just make a mark here. And in this case, because I added the mark on, I'm actually going to remove the pencil line. By removing the pencil line, I guarantee a perfectly similar cut on the 2 legs for the window. So now we've got 2 extensions and a head for the window. Now we've got a slightly more complex piece to cut, which is our window stool. So let's get that done next. So the next thing we want to work on is the stool and pre-assembling that for our window. The stool is the part of the window that sits just below the sash and just above the apron and the casing legs terminate into. So let's figure out how big we want to cut this. I'm going to pull out my handy dandy fraction calculator. So we know that the inside measurement is 30 and 1/8. And then we're going to add our reveal on each side, which is going to be 1/4 plus 1/4. We're doing that twice because we have 2 of them. Then we want to add the thickness of our casing, which is 4.5 inches. So we'll just add 9 inches. That's easy math. Then we want to add a reveal on each side of that, which is going to be 1 inch on one side, 1 inch on the other side, which is 2 inches. So we're left with 41 5/8. So we can go ahead and cut this piece to 41 5/8. We're going to swing the saw over to 45 degrees for our first cut. Now we're going to measure that 41 5/8. Now we're going to measure back 1 3/4. There's our return there. Now let's do it on the other side. We can glue these together. So I'll take a little wood glue. Now we're going to sand this down, get it nice and smooth. (41 5/8). So now we want to find the center. So the center of 41 5/8 would be 20.5 plus 5/16. 20 13/16. Let's see if I'm right. 20 13/16. Very good. So now we are going to mark the center mark. Put a C on there, the universal sign for center. Then we know our inside measurement is 30 1/8, which would be 15 1/16. So I'm going to nudge that over. And I'll hold 15 1/16 over here as well. So I mark there. I mark there. Now we go to the table saw to make our final cut. So over at the table saw, we're going to move this over till it just touches, and we're going to pass that through. Same thing over here. Now we'll finish it up on the miter saw. There you go. Okay, so the next step is we need to cut our 2 casing legs, and we know how big our jam extension legs are, and we want to add 3/16 to each of these dimensions to get our total leg height, because you have the jam extension, then you have a reveal, and then you have the casing. So the casing is sitting slightly outside and above the jam extension. So now we just have to do some quick math to figure that out. An easy way is a fraction calculator, which you can download on your phone if you don't have one. So 76 13/16 plus 3/16 equals 77 inches. So our first cut is going to be 77, and then our next one will be 76 15/16 plus 3/16, 77 1/8. And these are probably different dimensions because either the floor is slightly out of level or more likely the head is slightly out of level. So the first cut I'm going to make is I'm going to go 77, but I'll actually cut 78. So I leave an inch of material to remove on the bottom of my board after. But I want to break down this long material first. So I'm going to cut 78, 76. So this will be 77 as our first cut. Spin that around. Now we'll do our right side, which is 77 1/8. So now that we have our legs cut and we have our jamb extensions cut, we just need to do a little bit of math to figure out how wide we should make the next components. So we've got 28 inches to the center, and we want to add our reveal to that. So our door width is 28 inches. We want to add our reveal on both sides, which is 3/16. So we're going to add that times 2, 6/16, which you could also call 3/8. Gives us 28 3/8. And then we want to add the thickness of our casing, which is 4.5 times 2, which is 9. So we're going to add 9 equals 37 3/8. And then we want to add one more thing, which is going to be the projection of our molding beyond that. So we have a sub molding that's going to sit beyond that, and we want that to stick out 1/4 of an inch. So we're going to add 1/2. So our head that sits at the top is going to be 37 3/8, and the piece that sticks beyond it, we're going to add another 1/2 inch to for a 1/4 on each side. So plus 1/2 equals 37 7/8. So we'll go ahead and cut that piece now as well. For the head of our doors and windows, we're using a simple piece of 5.5 inch flat stock. Our measurement for that is 37 3/8. So that's the head of our door. So this is going to be the piece that sits below our head casing, between the legs and the head, and that is going to be 37 7/8. The next piece we need to put on is the crown that is going to go above our head casing. So it's pretty easy to figure that out. We just want it to return on either side, so we can go ahead and get that measurement right now easily. So the first thing we want to do is cut this crown molding, and the way you do that is by nesting it in the saw. So this is actually the bottom, this is the top, and I'm going to cut it nested backwards, and then I can just pivot the saw back and forth. If you have a double bevel miter saw like I do, then you can cut it on the flat, but if you don't, this way you can cut it with any miter saw by simply swinging it over to 45. So we're going to start with our first cut. Then we're going to take that head casing, which we already cut, right? That's the actual part from the door. We'll set that there. We'll line up exactly where our miter wants to be. And then it's as simple as just marking the back where we want the cut to be. And then we'll transfer that line right to the top, and we'll make a cut the opposite way. Now we need to do a return cut. So we're going to start with the miter cut. Then we know our head is actually 3/4 of an inch thick. So our return from the miter needs to extend back 3/4 of an inch. So it's easy enough to mark that. We can just hold our tape measure at the back here, line it up with any mark, and then be 3/4 of an inch over from that, bring it to the face, and make a square cut. Now we have one side. We just need the other side. So we do the exact same process, but a mirror image. Flip it over. Now we have two opposite returns. Let's glue these up. So we're going to put some wood glue on there. Line up the tips first. And then swing the piece in. While that sets up, I could spray a little activator on the back just to help that set up quicker. We'll do the same thing over here. We could test it out, see how it works on our head. Looks really good. So the next piece we want to work on is our sub head. We want it to stick out 1/4 of an inch on all sides, and we can see it sticks out a little bit more than 1/4 inch on this side. So what we're going to do is rip it down so it's only 1 inch thick. So here's a look at the piece installed, but you can see it looks a little bit sort of square edged for a traditional home. So we're going to go ahead and round over the sharp edges, predominantly this one, and this one. So I've got a router with an 1/8 inch roundover bit in it and a bearing, and the bearing is going to ride along the edge of the board, and we're just going to ease over that edge using this bit. So we did it on one side. Now we're going to flip it over and do on the other. You'll notice I'm also doing it on the edges as well. Now you can see that looks much more finished with that detail around the edge. So now we can start assembling this. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to connect this piece to the bottom of this, and we'll do that with some nails. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a bead of glue to the bottom of this. And I'm going to take this piece, put it into place. Make sure there's a 1/4 inch reveal there on each side. And then add some 1 inch brads. And now we have that piece mounted. This piece I'm going to leave off for now, just so we have a little bit of play once we get to the job site. So now we've got to do the cut list for our window. We know that our jamb extension's 40 7/8, and we need to add a 1/4 inch to all those dimensions for our reveal. So this is going to become 41 1/8, 41 1/8, and then we will come up with our head next. But first, let's cut the 2 legs. So my first cut is going to be a square cut on the bottom for our leg casing. So the next thing we need to do is we need to figure out our head width, right? And we're going to go through the same sort of process we did for the door. So we'll get out the calculator, right? 30 1/8 is the opening of our window. Then we're going to add our reveal, which is 1/4 and 1/4 on each side, which equals 1/2 when you add the two together. Then we want to add our casing, which is 4 1/2 inches. So that equals 9. So we're going to add 9, which gives us 39 5/8 for our head. And then we know the little bead detail below, right here, sticks out another 1/4 inch on each side. So we're just going to add another 1/2 inch to get the dimension of that bead. So now we can cut our head and our bead, and then we'll take the bead to the miter saw and rip it down, and then we'll put the roundover on it. Now we're going to measure this at 40 1/8. Now we need to cut our crown, and we're just going to use our head as the jig for that. So this part is an apron. It's going to go below the window stool. So what we wanted to do is be the same width as the head. So basically it'll finish in line with the casing that's above it. And we're just going to rip this same casing down, make it slightly narrower, just so it's a little bit less obvious down there. So the first thing we need to do is cut it to the length we want. We'll put some mitered returns on it, and then we'll run the whole thing through the table saw just so we have nice, clean, consistent cuts at the top. So the next thing we need to make is the window apron. The apron is the part that goes below the stool, like that. And all we need to do is just create some mitered returns and make sure that the outside diameter of it is the same width as the outside diameter of the casing legs and the head. So that's pretty easy. We already know that dimension. So we'll go ahead and get started on that right away. Our head measures 39 5/8. So we're just going to miter this on two sides at 39 5/8. So you'll notice I cut my two returns. I cut them while it was still on a big piece, just to make it a little safer. Now I can come and make my final cut in the apron. Now we're just going to do the same thing. We're just going to glue these two sides back on. So to complete the apron, we're just going to use more of that glue. Now on this side, same thing. Put the glue on. So there's our apron. We'll put that in the pile, and these can all go to be installed. All right, now it's time for us to make the oak saddle. Now, there's a lot of different ways you can do this. You could make it out of solid material, but to keep it DIY friendly, I'm going to give you the way of doing it using only 3/4 inch stock. We're using oak in this case. You could use whatever you want, but the floors in this house happen to be oak. We can stain this piece to match the floors, and it's just going to make it as clean as possible. Now, a couple things to consider. We have a large step up into this, 1.5 inches. Oh no, right? And remember why we have that 1.5 inches is because we didn't want to rip out all the framing. So even though we have this large step that looks ugly, we did save money and time earlier in the job, and we made it a little bit easier, which is important when you're renovating a bathroom yourself. So there's always going to be a worst part of the house. That's what my buddy Steve Basic says. So I'm going to rip off his little quote and put it in here. So how are we going to do this? Well, the 3/4 material is actually less than the thickness we need, right? We need to be up at least 1.5 inches just to be flush. So how are we going to do it with 3/4? Well, it's pretty easy. We're going to just take a piece of 3/4, rip it to the size we need, and then we're just going to glue it on here to make an L shape. So that's going to be our first step, is gluing these two together. Once they're glued, then we can start making our passes through the table saw to create the shape we want to create the perfect transition. All right, so step one, we're going to use my favorite quick setting glue. I think this is great for do-it-yourselfers because it's really easy to work with and dries fast. If you are a professional, you might use a slower setting glue, use some clamps, but maybe you don't have clamps, so I'm going to show you that it's possible to do it without a lot of clamps. You really want to use plenty of this because this is a heavy-duty application and this is not the strongest glue available. So I'm going to put plenty of it on there and just hope it's enough. I'm going to bring my trusty nail gun back with some nails in it, and then we're just going to start at one end, make it pretty flush. Doesn't need to be perfectly flush. Now I'm going to come back with a little bit more glue on the back side, just for added support. And we can let that set up. I'm going to spray it with a little of this activator. Same thing on the front. So there you go. We now have an L-shaped piece of wood, but we have kind of an ugly seam at the front, wouldn't you say? It's not perfect, not great. So how about we try and clean it up on the table saw? Use the tools you have. You probably don't have a jointer, so we'll act like this is a jointer, and we're just going to rip off a tiny bit of material. In our case, 1/16 of an inch. We bring that blade up, and we'll make a cut. You can see that it's already looking a lot better. So here we are, we have a cross section of our assembly. And we know the floor is 1.5 inches, so I'm going to go ahead and mark where the tile is. So there's where the tile is going to be. Now what we want to try and do is soften things so we're not pinching our toes. So we're going to come up with a 45-degree angle there. And then we should try and do the same over here as much as possible with a nice 45-degree angle there as well. Even though there's a rather large step, we'll try and soften that to some degree. So that's a look at the 2 cuts we're going to make for this saddle. And then we'll come down here. Okay, for our next cut, we're going to bring the blade over so it's cutting just below the surface there. We're just going to make a quick cut like that. Now we're going to bring this so it's cutting up to there, right where we want it to pass through, right into that space there. Beautiful. We'll slide it over. Now we're going to bend this over one more time. Now we're just going to knock that corner off. All right, now we've got this cut and sanded, but it's long. So the first thing I did was I marked the center. Then I measured the width of my door opening, which is 28, so 14 in this direction, 14 in that direction. And we're gonna see if we can get the horns to work, which means that little piece sticking out. So we're gonna cut this 1/4 inch longer than the full dimension, and then we'll recut it again to create those little horns. Okay, so there we go. We've got the little horn sticking out. Now let's bring all this to the job and see if it fits. Okay, so now we've got our trim. We're gonna go ahead and assemble it on the window. We'll see how our cuts look. I'm gonna go ahead and start with our window stool. So you can see this has got a little angle on the back. This is actually a stock profile in the lumber yards, at least locally available to me, and it kind of matches up with the window sill that the window sits in. So we're gonna come over here and take this. I'm going to put this in here. Now I'm just going to tap it down into place. I'm going to use a little shim. Protect it. Okay. So now that piece is in, we can go ahead and put our jam extension material. The jam extension is going to be sandwiched. Doesn't need to be super strong, so I'm going to go ahead and use 23 gauge pin nails. If you don't have a 23 gauge pin nailer, you could of course use 18 gauge brad nails. That will pretty much get you through the whole thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to flush this up. I'm going to hold my nails a little bit back so when we put our casing on, it hides the nail holes. Last part is the header. See, that just sits on top of there. I've got it slightly lower. Now it's time to install the legs of our casing, and I'm going to put a little wood glue here and here at the base of each of them. I want the casing to be 1/4 inch of a reveal, so we're going to take this combination square and a pencil and just make a couple reference lines. Little sealant back here. And that's going to hold it. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take these trim head screws. You can see the head on this screw is very small, and I'm going to screw up through the bottom just to marry these two together and really reinforce that glue joint. The reason I'm doing that is because it's easy to do. You could use any type of screw. You could use a drywall screw, but the apron is actually going to cover the head of the screw. So why not add that reinforcement because we can. So now I'm going to switch to the 18 gauge nailer with 2-inch brads, and I'm just going to put a couple nails holding this to the window frame. Next step is the head casing with our little pre-applied bead. You can see why now it's good that we glued that on ahead of time. So now that we've got the head casing installed, we can see that there's a big gap at the back, and that's the nature of the fact that I decided to put the casing on top of the tile rather than flush with the drywall or on top of the drywall, right? Because the reason I decided to do that is I wanted it to have a nice look here, but it gives us some issues way at the top. So what we're gonna have to do is we're gonna have to pack this out with some wood. So let's take a measurement, and then we'll see what it takes to fix that. That's about 3/8 of an inch. So we need to cut a piece of wood that is 3/8 of an inch by roughly 9 3/4. So let's cut that piece and install it. All right, we're gonna set the table saw to 3/8 of an inch. Then we'll make a quick rip. Now we have our two pieces, and we're going to cut one of these to 1/4 inch. All right, so I cut that piece of wood. Now I'm going to apply a little bit of glue back here. Take that, just glue it right there. I'm going to keep my hand well away, even though these are very short nails, and just tack that in place. Need a little piece for this. Obviously, it's nice to forecast things ahead of time and maybe made this out of thicker material, but for a detail like this, sometimes you just have to be in the field and work it out, and that's what I did here. Once we put paint and filler on this, it's going to completely disappear, so I'm not too concerned about it. But you can see it's a bit of an awkward repair we had to do there. So the next thing I want to do is put a little bit of wood glue on the top here, or in this case, I'll put it on the bottom just because it's easier for me to access. I'll put it on the underside of this head casing. Slide that in, and then line it up. Next piece is our crown. It sits like that. So we're going to put a couple reference marks up there. I'm going to add a little back caulking on this. So the last part of the window casing is going to be our apron. And I'm going to put a bead of sealant on the bottom here. Which will help keep water from getting behind it if it ever gets wet. Shouldn't get too wet because it's just a tub, but just in case. All right, that's lined up there. Now we just need to install the window stop and we'll be good to go. All right, so the next thing I want to do is put this saddle in the doorway, and one thing you'll notice is that haven't put the casing on and I've removed the door stops, and the reason I've done that is so that I can pop this into place. There's a couple preparatory steps I want to take. The first one being I want to add a piece of wood here because there's going to be a lot of weight and traffic here, and I don't want this piece to be hollow. We want to set this in some construction adhesive, but I don't want it to be quite so deep. So I'm going to head and nail this down just to make sure it's nice and secure. It'll also give me something to screw to later. So we'll just pop Couple nails there. Next thing I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and stain this now because it's going to be easier for me to not have to stain it in place because I won't have to do any masking. So I'll just take a little bit this floor stain that I already have and just put that right on there. Okay, here's a look at it. We're going to let that dry a bit and then we will install it. All right, the next step we want to do is put some construction adhesive down. I don't really think you can use too much. It's going to keep it from squeaking. It's going to support where you're walking. So we're going to use plenty. Now we're going to take this and fit it in there. But you'll notice it doesn't fit. So you can either cut it short, or if you have some sort of way of just spreading the door a little bit, it should allow it to go in. So I'm just going to put a couple cranks, and you see it doesn't take much to get it to just basically fall right into place. And I can just push that down. Although it might seem like overkill, I'm going to put a couple trim head screws because it's really going to help compress it down and keep it from creaking. So we're going to put that right in the center walk area where your feet are going to land. Okay, now that we've got it set and screwed, this screw's a little bit proud, but once the glue dries, we can back that out and we'll fill that with filler or wax. So I'm just gonna back this off. Now we've got a nice tight reveal on each side, and we can put our doorstop and casing in. Okay, we're gonna do a 3/16 reveal. We're gonna mark it on the jamb. Now we're gonna take some brad nails and we will shoot our jamb extension legs in place. Here we go. Other side. Now we're going to back caulk this to keep it from moving around and minimize the nails we need. Here we go. All right, so now I'm going to install this leg. Tack it in. A little bit of glue on the top again. A little bit of squeeze out there. So you can see our crown doesn't fit. So we're going to need to trim off the distance between the offset, which measures 5/8. So we'll trim 5/8 of an inch off that side, then it should fit in perfectly. All right, now that we've made that cut, we're gonna make a little mark referencing the bottom here of our crown. I'll extend that all the way across. Hold that up where we want it, just like that. And we're gonna put a little bit of sealant on the back again. To solidify that connection. Put that right where we want it. All right, we've got the trim installed on this door. The next step is going to be what? It's going to be filling the nail holes, of course. Everyone's looking for a non-shrink wood filler. A wood filler, basically when you apply it to a nail hole, right, what happens is there is some sort of fluid inside the wood filler that evaporates and then shrinks. So a lot of times you'll see on the container non-shrinking, but they all shrink a little bit. So it's not uncommon for you to fill a nail hole, then have to refill a nail hole, and everyone's sort of on this endless quest to find the perfect nail hole filler. But for the sake of this video, I just used a standard one you can get easily, and I'll show you how you can get decent results just by using this. And one thing you'll notice is the first thing I've done is I've used the big stretch adhesive behind this. So I'm not relying just on nails, I'm also going to rely on that sealant to help bind it to the tile. So that's one thing, because it's eliminated several nails. I don't have to use quite as many to hold it in place. So that's one hack, because now we have less filling. The other thing we're gonna do is I'm gonna try and do what's called overfilling. So I'm gonna put the putty on top of the nail hole, but I'm going to leave a little bit of excess over the top. And what I'm hoping that's gonna allow me to do is when it shrinks, there still will be some putty sticking out of the hole, and that will allow me to sand it flush after it's dried. One thing I'm doing is I'm really working this into the hole. You don't want it to just be sitting on the surface, because when you sand it, it can fall out. So I'm filling and then overfilling, working it in, and then leaving a little bit on the surface to sand off. And I'm just gonna go repeat that process over the course of the whole door. Let's do it. Occasionally, as you work your way around, you're gonna find a place where the nail is sticking proud of the trim. And I like to use this tool called a spring nail set. Of course, you can use a traditional nail set with a hammer, but this is a great little tool and relatively inexpensive too, so worth purchasing if you're a DIYer. And it just sets it in. Now we can take our filler, put a little bit on there. Still a little bit proud, so we'll give it one more good set here. So now that the wood filler has had a few minutes to dry, might take a few minutes, might take a day, depending on the type of wood filler you're using, we can sand it. I've got a couple different options here. I have a sanding sponge, different shapes to get into the crevices. I've got just some basic sandpaper. I'm using 220, 180. You could also use a palm sander if you had a lot to do, but in the case of a bathroom, you may as well just do it by hand. It'll give you a feel for how you're doing. So for the big areas, I'm just gonna start working vertically like this. Remember, you're not only sanding the nail hole, you're also resurfacing the primer. In my case, if you have raw wood, then it might be a different process, but you're also sanding that surface, because basically what we're doing is we're prepping for paint, right? And that primer is building up on the layer of wood that's below. So we just want to smooth that out, because that primer isn't glossy smooth. It's been handled, it's been damaged as it's been transported since it was originally primed. So we're surfacing all this. We want to sand all these little crevices, and some of it, like the crown, we might just get in there with our fingers. These little details in the bead is a great spot to use this sanding sponge, and we can really clean out that bead, make sure it's nice and clean and crisp. One thing that any painter knows is that a good paint job is 90% prep, 10% paint. If you want to paint something and you just want to run in and get that perfect paint job, it's impossible. Whenever we do a really flawless paint job, the first thing someone asks me is, what kind of paint did you use? And I tell them, it doesn't matter what paint we use. We could use cheap paint over good prep work, and you'd never know the difference. What you're noticing is good prep work, and that's what we want to do now. So now it's time to turn our attention to this window here. We've sanded it down, and before we do a little bit of primer on the bare wood, what we want to do is clean it up. So I'm getting all the dirt and debris that I can off of this, the dust, because think about when you look at a car or a very high quality finished paint job. Think of how reflective that is. A lot of people don't know what they're not seeing, and what they're not seeing is little hairs and little bits of dust. So when you look at a house, typically you'll see all of these marks and drips, and that's just a symptom of bad prep work. If you don't clean properly, you're gonna get that dust in there. And although this is an extremely old window, so I'm not really looking to get a perfect paint job, but I just wanted to share with you the concept. Once again, we're trying to make this realistic as possible, and most people won't go through the quite exorbitant efforts that it takes to get that mirror finish, and it may not be justifiable in a bathroom. But if you're looking for that, know that you have to clean, control dust, and sand between coats. Now let's get to the primer. So I've got my primer here. I find a little cut bucket and a roller can be a profitable little combination to have. Use a brush that you're comfortable with. I've got a rather large one, but you know, you might be better off with a smaller one. And we're just going to treat any of the bare wood. You'll notice that we haven't applied the sealant yet because I'll be sanding between coats. I would rather not have the sealant in there because I may end up damaging the sealant with the sandpaper, or if the sealant is not 100% cured, I might get some dust in there that is gonna stick and look bad on the finished product. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do the sealant last. That'll be the last thing we do just before our top coat. We don't really have to prime everything. We're just priming the areas where there's raw wood or nail holes. You know, the more primer you put on, the more sanding you're gonna have to do, because you should be sanding all of the primer. Down here at the bottom, got some nail holes. We've got this exposed area where we sanded it in the shop. Getting in there, sealing that up. Don't need to get everything. I'm already seeing little bits of dust and debris landing in my work. That's a good example of what you don't want. You don't want to be moving around little items. You want to have it clean beforehand. You'll notice that I don't have masking tape in place. It's important to use masking tape and drop cloths whenever necessary. I'm gonna put this primer coat on with no masking tape, and I probably will add some for the finish coat, but I wanted to show you that masking tape isn't 100% necessary if you are able to cut, meaning paint a edge of something without getting it on an adjacent surface. So that's the reason I haven't used masking tape, but we definitely can do that in the next step. It's very easy to remove paint and primer from glass. So you'll notice I am actually getting the glass painted. I'm not too concerned about this window because I probably will swap it out during this renovation. I may just swap the glass because tempered glass is often, if not always, required within the proximity of a bathtub. In case you were to slip and fall, you do not want your hand going through this plate glass. So I'm probably gonna swap it out and make it a tempered glass or a laminated glass, just so I've eliminated that risk. For now, I'm gonna show that I could just get some paint on this glass, or primer in this case, and it would easily wipe off with a razor blade later. I'm not too concerned about getting a little bit of primer on the wall right now if it makes sure I get the paint where I need it. Okay, so I put our primer on, I've sanded it down. Now it's time to apply the caulk. Where do we put the caulking? I'm gonna put it here, here, anywhere where two boards come together. I want to use a decent amount of sealant. You can see a lot of carpenters like to put a very fine amount on there and then just leave the tiniest bit in the joint. And unfortunately, the point of sealant is to sort of allow that wood to expand and contract, expand and contract. And this big stretch adhesive really is very elastic, but it can't be elastic like that if it doesn't have enough substance to grip onto, or the piece of the sealant is so thin that it's not binding to anything. So we're actually gonna put a healthy bead down here, we'll tool it down, and it should let our paint job be much more durable. I'm just gonna tool that with my finger. They do sell tools for this, but this is the simple way if you don't have any equipment. Very easy to touch this up if you don't have enough. All right, now that we're ready for paint, I'm gonna open up this new gallon. Typically, I would advise mixing this up. I actually just got this from the paint store, so it is previously mixed, but I did give it an extra shake. You don't want to paint directly out of the bucket, because if you get debris on your bristles, you're going to add it into the paint. So we're always going to transfer to a different container when we're working with the finished paint. One mistake I notice DIYers making with a paintbrush is they dip the paintbrush into the paint, bring it out, and then drag the paint off on the side. Now what that does is basically you'll create a line of paint here. So then the next time you drag it, you want to go a little higher. And you have to keep repeating that, going higher and higher each time to drag all the paint off. And before you know it, what happens is you've got paint on the top here, you've got it on your hand, and it becomes a mess and it's hard to work with. As well as that, the paint on the top here starts to dry out and then it becomes harder to clean the brush. You really only want the bottom portion of the bristles to be wet. So if you're painting out of a bucket, what you want to do is dip and pat the sides of the pail. If you're painting like this, it's going to be the same concept. A little blot on each side, that's it. You can go a little bit more if you want to, but the concept is not dragging, it's just sort of patting off the paint and cutting in. All right, so we've sanded this down. This is going to be our first coat of paint. We do not want to be dragging the paint across dry. We want to maintain a wet edge, and we want to work quickly and in sections. So I'm going to start here, then I'll work this way, I'll work up, and I'll work across the top. I'm going to do first the difficult spots, and then I'll do the center because this is what I want to look best, and I don't want to come here and then mess it up as I'm working slowly on the sides. You'll notice, or you may notice, that this is a double hung window, meaning both the upper and lower sash moves. And you'll notice that when I'm applying paint to it, I am making it so that the top sash doesn't move. That's not a great choice, but I'll tell you that it has been painted shut for many years. I wasn't planning on changing that. So we're just gonna leave it as a single hung window with only the bottom sash being operable. Once again, I am opting to paint the glass rather than cut into the glass because there's many, many layers of coated paint on these windows. It's hard to cut a straight line, so I'm just going to rely on a razor blade to do that for me later. And I'm just gonna go ahead and paint the glass. All right, that's the final paint on the trim, and while we wait for that to dry, it's time for me to say goodbye to you. Today we covered trim, door saddles, windows, a couple different details, and we talked about some details of painting. Now, obviously, your bathroom could be completely different. You may have baseboard, you may have built-ins, you may have all sorts of different carpentry-related tasks and painting tasks. But what I want you to understand is that if you are tackling a trim carpentry project, you're gonna need a miter saw, a table saw, probably a nail gun, sandpaper, perhaps a sander. So hopefully you understand the tools that are required to do the task. If you're gonna do a painting project, obviously you need rollers and brushes, primer. It's important to clean up. It's important to protect your work area. So hopefully you picked up some of the essentials of what it takes to get through carpentry and painting in a bathroom remodel. Next time, we're gonna have finishes getting mounted. So we'll have some plumbing fixtures, some finished light fixtures, and we'll have the vanity going in. So there should be a lot coming together. See you next time on Let's Renovate a Bathroom.